Hey everyone, welcome back to Heartfelt Journeys, where real stories about unexpected connections change everything. Today's story is about a computer crash, a birthday password, and a question that completely rewrote someone's definition of love. If you believe in second chances and moments that surprise you when you least expect them, you're going to want to stay until the very end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets turned upside down by the most ordinary circumstances. For me, Sarah Chen, that moment came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when my computer decided to have what I can only describe as a complete nervous breakdown. At 48, I thought I had figured out most of life's curveballs. I had survived a divorce that felt like emotional surgery without anesthesia, rebuilt my career as a marketing director at Creative Solutions Inc. and learned to live alone in my pristine townhouse in Maple Ridge without jumping at every random house noise. What I hadn't mastered was backing up my files, which became painfully obvious when my home office computer made a sound like a dying mechanical whale and refused to show me anything but a blank blue screen. My name is Sarah, and if you met me at work, you'd probably think I had everything figured out. I can present marketing strategies to boardrooms full of executives without breaking a sweat, negotiate contracts that save companies thousands of dollars, and somehow make quinoa sound appealing in wellness campaign copy. But ask me to troubleshoot why my computer won't recognize my external drive, and I become the kind of person who checks if it's plugged in 17 times while muttering words my teenage daughter definitely didn't learn from me. The computer crisis happened on one of those October days when Connecticut decides to remind you that winter is coming whether you're ready or not. I had been working from home, trying to finish a presentation for our biggest client, when my trusty desktop just gave up on life entirely. 5 years of photos, work files, and digital memories vanished into whatever dimension technology goes to die. I sat there staring at the blue screen, feeling like someone had just told me my house had burned down while I was watching. Living alone means you become your own IT department, emergency contact, and general problem solver. After my divorce from David 2 years ago, I had promised myself I would learn to handle everything independently. No more calling my ex-husband every time something broke or needed fixing. No more feeling helpless when technology failed me. But as I sat in my ergonomic desk chair, surrounded by the kind of organized minimalism that screams, "Recently divorced, woman taking control of her space," I realized that my independence had some significant gaps. Monica, my best friend since college and fellow member of the Divorced at 40-something and Figuring It Out Club, had given me the business card for TechFix Solutions months earlier. She swore by their house call service after they saved her laptop from what she dramatically called the great wine spill disaster of last spring. The card had been tucked behind my emergency pizza delivery menu, which probably says something about my priorities. But desperate times call for desperate measures. When I called TechFix Solutions, a friendly voice with a slight accent assured me that someone would be out within 2 hours. The voice belonged to Carlos, who explained that their technician Jake would take excellent care of my digital emergency, as he called it. Carlos had the kind of warm, reassuring tone that made you believe everything would work out fine, which was exactly what I needed to hear while staring at my technological disaster. I spent the next hour pacing around my townhouse, straightening things that were already straight and wondering why I felt so nervous about having a stranger in my space. The house still felt too quiet most days. After 20 years of marriage, even an unhappy one, the silence took some getting used to. I had decorated everything in calming blues and whites, creating the kind of serene environment you see in home. Design magazines. It was beautiful, peaceful, and sometimes felt like living inside a very elegant waiting room. My townhouse in the Willowbrook development was supposed to represent my fresh start. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, and a home office where I could build my post-divorce career. The neighbors were a mix of young families and empty nesters, and everyone maintained their lawns with the kind of dedication usually reserved for religious practices. Mrs. Patterson, my 72-year-old neighbor, had appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator and could provide a detailed report of everyone's daily activities if asked. When the doorbell rang at exactly the promised time, I felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. Opening the door to strangers wasn't something I'd had to do much during my married years. David had always handled service calls, repairs, and any interaction with people coming to the house. Learning to manage these situations myself was part of my ongoing education in independence. The man standing on my doorstep looked nothing like what I had expected. Jake Rivera appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a navy blue polo shirt with the TechFix Solutions logo, and carried a toolkit that seemed almost as big as he was. What struck me immediately was how he smiled when he introduced himself. Not the practiced customer service smile I was used to from repair people, but something genuine and slightly amused. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Jake from TechFix Solutions. I understand we have a computer situation that needs some attention." His voice was calm and reassuring, with just enough confidence to make me believe he actually knew what he was doing. I invited him in, immediately launching into what I'm sure sounded like a panicked explanation of everything that had gone wrong. He listened patiently while I described the mysterious noises, the blue screen of despair, and my complete inability to retrieve anything important. "Let me take a look and see what we're dealing with," he said, following me to my home office. "These things usually aren't as catastrophic as they seem." Watching Jake work was oddly mesmerizing. He moved around my computer setup with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from years of experience. His hands were steady and sure as he connected various cables and external drives, and he explained each step in terms that didn't make me feel like a technological dinosaur. Most repair people had a tendency to speak in code that left me nodding and pretending to understand. But Jake translated everything into normal human language. "Okay, so the good news is that your hard drive isn't completely dead," he said after about 20 minutes of diagnostic work. "The bad news is that your operating system has definitely seen better days. We can recover most of your files, but we're going to need to do a complete system restore." I felt a wave of relief so strong it was almost embarrassing. "You can really get everything back?" "Most of it, yes. Though I have to ask about your backup situation. When was the last time you saved copies of your important files somewhere else?" The question made me wince. "Define backup situation." Jake looked up from the computer screen with an expression that was part amusement, part gentle concern. "Any external drives, cloud storage, email copies of important documents?" "I email myself photos sometimes. Does that count?" He smiled, and something about that smile made my stomach do a little flip that I definitely wasn't prepared for. "It's a start. We're going to set you up with a proper backup system so this doesn't happen again. But first, I need to ask about your passwords to access some of these files." This was where things got embarrassing. I had always been terrible with passwords, using the same few combinations for everything despite Emma, my 17-year-old daughter, constantly lecturing me about digital security. When Jake asked for my main computer password, I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. "It's my birthday," I admitted. "Just the numbers, month, day, year." Jake paused in his typing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your birthday? Just the numbers?" I know. Emma tells me constantly that it's terrible security. But it's easy to remember, and I figured who would want to hack into a marketing director's home computer anyway? "Sarah," he said, and something about the way he said my name made me pay attention. "Using your birthday as a password is like leaving your house key under a welcome mat with a sign that says, 'Key here.' That bad? Worse. Especially since most people's birthdays are findable online these days." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "When is your birthday?" "October 15th, 1975. Jake's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard entirely. He turned to look at me with an expression that seemed to contain several different emotions at once. Surprise, calculation, and something that might have been nervousness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're 48, he said, and it wasn't really a question. "Guilty as charged." "Why, is there an age limit on computer repair?" He laughed, but it sounded a little shaky. "No, it's just, this might sound completely crazy, but I have to ask, are you single?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a candle that had just been blown out. I felt my entire body go still, not sure if I had heard him correctly, or if this was some kind of strange technical support small talk. I wasn't familiar with. "I'm sorry," Jake said quickly, his cheeks flushing pink. "That was completely inappropriate. I don't usually ask clients personal questions. I never ask clients personal questions. I don't know what came over me." I said quietly, surprising myself. "Single, divorced 2 years ago." Jake looked at me for a long moment, his brown eyes serious behind his glasses. "This is going to sound insane, and please feel free to call my boss and report me for unprofessional behavior. But I have to say it or I'll regret it forever." My heart was doing something rhythmic and insistent against my ribs. "Say what? Would you marry me?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at Jake, certain I had misheard or that this was some kind of elaborate technical support prank. I didn't understand. "I'm sorry, what?" "I know how it sounds," he said, his words coming faster now, like he was afraid if he slowed down he'd lose his nerve. "I know we just met 20 minutes ago, and I know you're probably thinking I'm completely unhinged, but I've never felt anything like what I felt when you told me your birthday. October 15th, 1975. Sarah, that's my birthday too." I felt my mouth open, but no words came out. The coincidence seemed too strange to be real, like something that would happen in a romantic comedy rather than in my actual life. "You're 48, Jake continued, "and I'm 32. I know that's a significant age difference, and I know this whole situation is bizarre, but I've spent my entire adult life believing that when you know something is right, you should act on it. And Sarah, this feels right in a way that nothing ever has." "You're 32, I repeated, trying to process the information. "And you just asked me to marry you." I did, and I meant it. I sat down heavily in my desk chair, feeling like I needed something solid underneath me. "You realize we've known each other for less than half an hour." "Time isn't always about duration," Jake said, moving closer, but not crowding me. "Sometimes it's about intensity, about recognition. I look at you, and something in me says, yes, her, finally." "This is insane," I said. But even as I said it, I could feel something shifting inside me, something that had been locked away since my divorce was stirring to life. "Completely insane," Jake agreed. "But sometimes the best things are." We looked at each other across my home office, surrounded by the detritus of my technological disaster, and I realized that my computer crashing might have been the best thing to happen to me in years. Not because I enjoyed digital catastrophes, but because it had brought this strange, earnest man into my living space with his impossible question, and his birthday that matched mine. "I don't even know your last name," I said. "Rivera. Jake Rivera. I'm 32. I've been running TechFix Solutions with my business partner Carlos for 3 years. I've never been married, and I just asked a woman I met 26 minutes ago to marry me." He smiled that genuine smile again. "Also, I can fix your computer and teach you about password security." Despite everything, I laughed. "Those are excellent qualifications." "Sarah," Jake said seriously, "I know this is crazy. I know you probably think I'm either completely unhinged or running some kind of elaborate scam. But would you at least consider having dinner with me? Somewhere public with witnesses, so you know I'm not a complete psychopath?" I looked at this man who had walked into my house to fix my computer, and instead had turned my entire world sideways with 6 words and a shared birthday. Everything rational in me said to politely decline, finish the computer repair transaction, and pretend this conversation had never happened. But there was something else, something I hadn't felt in years, that was whispering maybe. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Of course. But while you're thinking, let me finish fixing your computer. And Sarah, whatever you decide about dinner or anything else, I promise I'll respect it completely." As Jake turned back to my computer, his fingers moving confidently across the keyboard, I sat in my chair trying to process what had just happened. A stranger had walked into my house, fixed my password problem, and asked me to marry him. He was 16 years younger than me. He seemed completely sincere, and something about the whole impossible situation felt more right than anything had in a very long time. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "How's the computer situation? Did the tech guy fix everything?" I stared at the message, then at Jake's back as he worked quietly at my desk, and realized I had absolutely no idea how to answer that question. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my car outside the Brew and Bean coffee shop downtown, gripping my steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Jake had finished repairing my computer with remarkable efficiency, installing backup software and patiently explaining how to create passwords that wouldn't make cybersecurity experts weep. He had also left his business card with his personal cell phone number written on the back and a simple message. If you want to continue this conversation over coffee, I'll be at Brew and Bean tomorrow at 2. No pressure, but I hope to see you there. The rational part of my brain had spent the past 18 hours listing all the reasons why meeting Jake Rivera for coffee was a terrible idea. He was 16 years younger than me. He was a complete stranger who had asked me to marry him after knowing me for less than 30 minutes. I was still rebuilding my life after a devastating divorce and had no business getting involved with anyone, let alone someone who seemed to operate on a completely different emotional wavelength than the rest of humanity. But there was another voice in my head, one that had been growing stronger since Jake left my house with that impossible smile and his promise to respect whatever I decided. This voice reminded me that I was 48 years old, not 88, and that maybe it was time to stop making decisions based entirely on what seemed sensible and start considering what might actually make me happy. Emma had called that morning from her father's house, where she spent most weekends since the divorce. My 17-year-old daughter had developed an uncanny ability to sense when something significant was happening in my life, probably because I was terrible at hiding my emotions despite years of corporate training and maintaining professional composure. "Mom, you sound weird," she had announced without preamble when I answered her call. "Did something happen with your computer? Did they fix it?" "Yes, they fixed it. Everything's fine." I had tried to sound casual, but Emma knew me too well. "Who's they? Was it that company Monica recommended? Did they send someone creepy? Because if some tech bro was inappropriate with you, I will personally destroy him on every social media platform known to humanity." The fierce protectiveness in my daughter's voice made my heart ache in the best possible way. Emma had been my anchor during the divorce, mature beyond her years, but still my little girl when it mattered. She worried about me living alone, worried about me working too much, and definitely worried about the possibility of me dating again. The technician was perfectly professional, I had said, which was technically true even if it left out some rather significant details. Very competent. Fixed everything quickly. Good. Because honestly, Mom, your password situation was a digital disaster waiting to happen. Using your birthday for everything? I've been telling you that's basically like putting your social security number on a billboard. If only she knew that my terrible password security had led to the most surreal conversation of my adult life. But Emma was dealing with enough complexity navigating her senior year of high school and splitting time between her father's new family and my quiet townhouse. She didn't need to worry about her mother's sudden and completely inexplicable romantic complications. Now I sat outside Brew and Bean, watching people flow in and out of the coffee shop's warm, welcoming interior. Maple Ridge's downtown area had the kind of deliberate charm that attracted young families and retirees who wanted small-town atmosphere with convenient access to bigger cities. The coffee shop occupied the corner spot of a renovated brick building, with large windows that offered views of the tree-lined street and the small park across the way. I had driven past Brew and Bean countless times, but had never actually gone inside. During my marriage, David and I had been more of a Starbucks couple, grabbing standardized drinks on our way to whatever scheduled activity filled our weekends. Spontaneous coffee dates at local establishments hadn't been part of our routine, which now seemed like just another small indicator of how disconnected we had become from our own community. At exactly 2 minutes past 2, I finally forced myself out of the car and walked toward the coffee shop entrance. Through the windows, I could see Jake sitting at a small table near the back, wearing jeans and a dark green sweater that made his brown eyes look even warmer. He was reading something on his phone, but looked up the moment I walked through the door, as if he had been aware of my presence even before I entered. The coffee shop smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, with an underlying hint of something that might have been vanilla or caramel. Local artwork covered the walls, and mismatched furniture gave the space a comfortable, lived-in feeling that was the opposite of the corporate coffee chains I was used to. Jake stood when he saw me, and I noticed that he looked almost as nervous as I felt. "Sarah," he said, and there was something in the way he said my name that made my stomach flutter again. I wasn't completely sure you'd come. Neither was I admitted, approaching his table. Even driving here, I kept thinking I should turn around and go home and pretend yesterday never happened. But you didn't turn around. No, I didn't. I sat down across from him, placing my purse carefully beside my chair. Though I'm still not entirely sure why. Jake smiled, and some of the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. Can I get you something to drink? They have excellent coffee, and their chai latte is apparently legendary among the local mom groups. The casual mention of mom groups reminded me again of our age difference, and I wondered if Jake had any idea what it meant to be part of the demographic he was referencing. But there was no judgment in his voice, no condescension, just genuine interest in making sure I was comfortable. Coffee sounds perfect. Black, no sugar. A woman who knows what she wants, Jake said, heading toward the counter. I respect that. While he was gone, I took the opportunity to study him more carefully. Yesterday, focused on my computer crisis, I had noticed his competence and his unexpected question, but hadn't really absorbed the details of who he was as a person. Today, watching him interact with the barista, I could see that he moved through the world with quiet confidence. He was polite without being deferential, friendly without being overly familiar. The barista, a young woman with bright purple hair and multiple ear piercings, clearly knew him and seemed genuinely pleased to see him. Regular customer? I asked when he returned with our drinks. Carlos and I come here most mornings before we start our service calls. It's become part of our routine. Jake settled back into his chair, wrapping his hands around a large mug that smelled like some kind of spiced coffee blend. Small business owners tend to become creatures of habit. Tell me about your business. How did you end up running a computer repair service? The question seemed to relax him, and I watched his face light up as he talked about tech fix solutions. He and Carlos had met in community college, both studying computer science but approaching technology from different angles. Carlos was brilliant with business systems and networking, while Jake specialized in troubleshooting and repair. They had started the company almost by accident, helping friends and family with computer problems until demand grew enough to make it a legitimate business. We realized there was a real need for personal patient tech support, Jake explained. Most people don't want to haul their computers to some big box store and wait 2 weeks to get them back. They want someone who can come to their house, explain what's wrong in normal language, and fix things without making them feel stupid for not understanding technology. Like you did with me yesterday. Like I tried to do with you yesterday. Though I have to admit, asking you to marry me probably wasn't part of standard customer service protocol. The direct acknowledgement of what had happened made my cheeks warm. But it also appreciated his willingness to address the elephant in the room, rather than pretending it hadn't occurred. About that, I said carefully. I've been thinking about what you said. About sharing a birthday and feeling some kind of instant recognition. Jake leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on me. And I think you're either completely insane or possibly the most honest person I've ever met. I haven't decided which yet. Could be both, he said, with a self-deprecating smile. My track record with normal social interactions isn't exactly stellar. What made you say it? Really? Because in 48 years of existence, no one has ever proposed to me within an hour of meeting me. Even David took 6 months to suggest we move in together. Jake was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee mug in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost cautious. Have you ever had one of those moments where everything just clicks into place? Where something that seemed impossible suddenly makes perfect sense? You mean, like finally understanding a complicated marketing strategy after staring at data for hours? Sort of, but bigger, more fundamental. He looked directly at me, and I could see he was struggling to articulate something important. I've dated people, Sarah. I've had relationships that seemed logical and appropriate and perfectly reasonable, but I've never looked at someone and felt like my entire future just shifted into focus. And you felt that yesterday? With me? The moment you told me your birthday, something in my brain just went, oh, there you are. I've been waiting for you. Jake shook his head. I know how that sounds. I know it's not rational or practical or even particularly believable. It sounds terrifying, I said honestly. It is terrifying. But it's also the most certain I've ever felt about anything in my life. We sat in silence for several minutes, sipping our coffee and watching other customers come and go. A group of teenagers occupied a corner table, bent over laptops and textbooks with the intense focus that suggested either studying or social media crisis management. An elderly couple shared a piece of coffee cake, talking quietly and occasionally laughing at some private joke. Everyone else seemed to be living normal, predictable lives, while I sat across from a man who had upended my entire understanding of how relationships were supposed to develop. "Tell me about your divorce," Jake said suddenly, and the change of subject caught me off guard. That's quite a conversational shift. I figure if we're going to do this, whatever this is, we should probably know the important stuff about each other. And something that shaped 2 years of your life seems pretty important. I appreciated his directness even as it made me uncomfortable. Most people, even close friends, tended to approach the topic of my divorce delicately, as if it were a wound that might start bleeding again if examined too closely. David and I were married for 20 years, I began slowly. We met in college, got married right after graduation, built what looked like a very successful life together. House in the suburbs, good jobs, Emma. From the outside, we probably seemed like the perfect family. But from the inside? From the inside, we were two people who had grown into completely different directions while pretending we were still the same people who fell in love at 22. I took a sip of coffee, using the pause to organize my thoughts. David wanted a wife who would prioritize his career, who would be content managing household logistics and social obligations. And for a long time, I tried to be that person. What changed? Emma started high school, and I realized I had spent 15 years defining myself entirely through other people's needs. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, what made me happy, what my own goals were outside of supporting David's ambitions and raising our daughter. Jake nodded encouragingly, and I found myself continuing even though this wasn't typically the kind of information I shared with near strangers. I went back to school to finish my marketing degree, started working full-time again. David saw it as a phase, something I was doing to fill time until I came to my senses and returned to being the wife he expected. When I got promoted to director level and started traveling for work, he became resentful. Resentful how? He made it clear that my career ambitions were selfish and impractical, that I was neglecting my real responsibilities. When I refused to turn down a promotion that would require occasional travel, he started an affair with his dental hygienist. The words still tasted bitter, even 2 years later. Apparently, she understood what it meant to support a man's success. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "That must have been devastating." It was, not just the betrayal, but the realization that the person I had spent 20 years of my life with fundamentally didn't respect me as an individual. I was useful as long as I stayed in the box he had created for me. But the moment I tried to grow beyond that, I became a problem to be solved. And now? Now I'm learning who I am when I'm not trying to fit into someone else's expectations. It's harder than I thought it would be, but also more interesting. I looked at Jake, studying his face for signs of judgment or discomfort, which is why this situation with you is so confusing. Because I'm asking you to consider a relationship when you're still figuring out how to be single? That, and because you're 32 years old and asking someone who just spent 2 years learning not to define herself through other people to marry you based on a shared birthday and some kind of mystical recognition. Jake laughed, but it wasn't dismissive. When you put it like that, it does sound fairly problematic. Fairly problematic? Jake, this is completely insane by any reasonable standard. You're right, it is insane. But Sarah, can I ask you something? I think we're past the point of polite permission asking. When I asked you to marry me yesterday, what was your first instinct? Before your rational brain kicked in and started listing all the reasons it was impossible, what did you feel? The question made me pause because I had been trying not to examine that initial reaction too closely. I felt like someone had just asked me if I wanted to jump off a cliff. That sounds terrifying. It was terrifying. But it was also, what I struggled to find the right words, It was also the first time in years that someone had asked me to do something that felt completely outside the realm of reasonable expectations. And that appealed to you? It shouldn't have. I've spent the past 2 years learning to make sensible decisions, to think things through carefully, to not let my emotions override my judgment. But it did appeal to you. I took a long sip of coffee, buying time to consider how honest I wanted to be. Yes, it appealed to me, which probably says something deeply concerning about my psychological state. Or it says something about your willingness to take risks when something feels genuinely right. Jake, we don't know each other. You don't know that I'm obsessively organized to the point where Emma makes fun of my color-coded calendar system. You don't know that I cry during insurance commercials, or that I've never successfully kept a houseplant alive for more than 3 months. You don't know that I have anxiety attacks in grocery stores when there are too many people, or that I haven't been physically intimate with anyone since my divorce because the whole concept terrifies me now. You're right. I don't know those things. But I know that you use terrible passwords because you prioritize convenience over security. And instead of being embarrassed when I pointed that out, you laughed at yourself. I know that you care enough about your work to panic when you thought you'd lost important files. I know that you're rebuilding your life with intention and courage, and that you're scared of making another mistake, but you're here anyway. The way he cataloged these observations made something flutter in my chest. During my marriage, I had often felt invisible. Like David saw only the roles I filled, rather than who I actually was as a person. Jake seemed to notice details that felt essential rather than superficial. How do you know all that from one computer repair visit and an hour of conversation? Because I pay attention. Because when something matters to me, I notice everything. Jake reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Sarah, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not asking you to upend your life or compromise the independence you've worked so hard to build. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that sometimes the most important connections happen in ways that don't make logical sense. His hand was warm against mine, and I realized this was the first time anyone had touched me with gentle intention in longer than I cared to calculate. Not casual social contact or professional handshakes, but touch that meant something. What are you asking me then? Specifically? I'm asking you to let me take you to dinner. Somewhere nice, but not too fancy because I'm a small business owner and my budget has limits. I'm asking you to tell me more about your life and let me tell you about mine. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that age is just numbers and that connection is rare enough to be worth exploring even when it's inconvenient. And if dinner goes well, then maybe we have dinner again. And maybe we take walks and go to movies and I teach you about computer security while you help me figure out how to market my business to people who aren't 20-something tech enthusiasts. You want me to help with your business? Sarah, you're a marketing director. You understand how to communicate with people, how to build trust, how to present services in ways that make sense to customers. Yesterday, watching you talk about your work files, I realized I've been thinking about tech fix solutions all wrong. We shouldn't be marketing to people who understand technology. We should be marketing to people like you, who need technology to work, but don't want to become experts in it. The idea intrigued me more than it should have. During my marriage, David had never shown any interest in my professional expertise beyond the income it generated. The thought of someone actually wanting my input, seeing my skills as valuable and relevant, was surprisingly appealing. That's actually a smart business insight, I said. Most computer repair advertising focuses on technical capabilities rather than customer experience and communication. See? This is what I'm talking about. You understand things about business and people that I'm still learning. And you understand things about technology and problem solving that I clearly need to learn. Exactly. We could help each other, teach each other things, build something together instead of just trying to fit into each other's existing lives. The concept was seductive in a way that caught me completely off guard. Not romantic seduction, though there was certainly an element of attraction that I was trying not to examine too closely, but the seduction of partnership, of collaboration, of being seen as valuable for who I was, rather than how well I could support someone else's ambitions. This is moving very fast, I said. It doesn't have to. We can move at whatever speed feels comfortable for you. But Sarah, I don't want to pretend I'm not interested just because it's socially awkward or unconventional. and I don't want to pretend I'm not intrigued just because it scares me. So where does that leave us? I looked around the coffee shop at the normal people living their normal lives, and realized that normal had never made me particularly happy. Conventional had given me a 20-year marriage that ended in betrayal, and a carefully controlled life that often felt more like an elaborate waiting room than an actual existence. It leaves us planning a dinner date, I said, surprising myself with the decisiveness in my voice. Jake's smile was so bright it could have powered the coffee shop's lighting system. Really? Really, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we move slowly. No more marriage proposals until we've had at least 5 successful dates. Agreed. Though I reserve the right to bring it up again if those 5 dates go exceptionally well. Second, we keep this private for now. I don't want Emma or my family or my coworkers knowing I'm dating someone until I'm sure this isn't just some kind of post-divorce emotional crisis. Understood. Though at some point, if this goes where I hope it goes, you'll have to introduce me to Emma. If it goes where you hope it goes, introducing you to Emma will be the least of our challenges. I took a deep breath. Third, I need you to understand that I'm still figuring out who I am outside of marriage and motherhood. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me or make decisions for me or fix my life. I would never want to do any of those things. I like that you're independent and successful and building your own life. I just want to be part of it, not replace it. And finally, you need to know that dating someone 16 years older than you comes with complications you probably haven't considered. I'm going to be 50 when you're 34. I'll be 60 when you're 44. People are going to have opinions about us, and not all of them will be kind. Jake was quiet for a moment, and I could see him actually considering what I had said rather than just dismissing my concerns. Sarah, I've spent 32 years having people tell me what I should want, who I should date, how I should live, my life. My parents wanted me to be an engineer like my father. My friends think I should be dating women my own age who want to go clubbing and take Instagram photos of their brunch. None of that has ever felt right to me. And this does? This feels like the first honest thing that's happened to me in years. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, and when Jake walked me to my car, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what was possible. Not just romantically, but in terms of what I was willing to risk, for the chance at something extraordinary. Dinner tomorrow night? He asked as I unlocked my car door. Tomorrow night, but somewhere quiet where we can actually talk. I know exactly the place. As I drove home, I caught myself smiling for no particular reason other than the fact that for the first time in years, I was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with work deadlines or parental responsibilities, or the careful management of my post-divorce independence. I was looking forward to discovering what might be possible when 2 people decided to pay attention to something that felt important rather than something that seemed sensible. Emma called that evening while I was reviewing marketing reports and pretending I wasn't thinking about Jake Rivera and his impossible question. "Mom, you still sound weird," she announced without preamble. "And before you deny it, I've known you for 17 years. I can tell when something's different. Maybe I'm just happy that my computer is working properly again. Or maybe something happened with the computer repair guy that you're not telling me about." Sometimes my daughter's intuition was genuinely frightening. Why would you think that? Because you're using your trying to sound casual voice, which you only use when you're hiding something or when you're about to tell me we're having vegetables for dinner again. I laughed despite myself. "We're not having vegetables for dinner. So you are hiding something." Emma, sometimes adults have private thoughts and experiences that don't require immediate sharing with their teenage daughters. "Mom, if some tech bro was inappropriate with you, I need to know so I can ruin his life on social media." No one was inappropriate. Everything was completely professional. But something happened. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my desk chair, looking around my home office where less than 48 hours ago, a stranger had asked me to marry him and somehow made it seem like a reasonable question. Emma, hypothetically speaking, if someone your age met someone and felt an instant connection, would you think that was romantic or terrifying? Both. but mostly terrifying because instant connections usually mean someone's about to make a really bad decision. Emma paused. Mom, are you about to make a really bad decision? I don't know yet, but I might be about to make a really interesting one. The restaurant Jake chose was called Moonrise, a small Italian place tucked into a converted Victorian house on the outskirts of downtown Maple Ridge. I had driven past it countless times but never ventured inside, assuming it was either too expensive or too romantic for a recently divorced woman dining alone. As I pulled into the gravel parking lot, I realized Jake had somehow found the perfect balance between intimate and unpretentious, impressive without being overwhelming. The hostess, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a warm smile, led us to a corner table near a window that looked out onto a small garden lit with string lights. The interior felt like someone's elegant grandmother's dining room, with mismatched antique furniture, exposed brick walls, and the kind of genuine atmosphere that couldn't be manufactured by corporate restaurant designers. This place is beautiful, I said as Jake helped me with my chair, a gesture that surprised me with its old-fashioned courtesy. My friend Maria owns it with her husband. They converted his family's house about 10 years ago when the kids moved out and they needed a new project. Jake settled across from me, and I noticed he had changed into dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the green flecks in his brown eyes. They serve the kind of food that makes you want to learn Italian just so you can properly compliment the chef. A server approached our table with menus and a basket of bread that smelled like heaven wrapped in cloth. As she explained the evening specials, I found myself relaxing in a way that had become unfamiliar during my marriage. David had always managed restaurant interactions, ordering wine without consulting me, and making decisions about appetizers, based on his preferences rather than mine. Tonight, Jake asked what I liked, suggested dishes he thought I might enjoy, and deferred to my choices with the kind of natural respect that made me realize how rarely I had experienced genuine consideration in romantic settings. Tell me about Emma, Jake said, after we had ordered and were sharing bruschetta that tasted like summer captured in tomatoes and basil. What's she like? The question caught me off guard. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it suggested Jake understood that knowing me meant knowing about the person who mattered most in my life. Most men my age, the few I had tentatively considered dating since my divorce, seemed to view my daughter as either an obstacle to overcome or an inconvenience to be managed. Emma is brilliant, stubborn, fiercely protective, and probably smarter than both her parents combined, I said, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. She's planning to study environmental engineering at UConn next year, assuming she can stop organizing climate change protests long enough to finish her college applications. She sounds like someone who doesn't suffer fools gladly. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Emma has very strong opinions about most things, and she's not shy about expressing them. She's been my biggest supporter through the divorce, but she's also appointed herself my unofficial bodyguard against any potential romantic mistakes. Jake laughed, but it was thoughtful, rather than dismissive. How does she feel about you dating? Theoretically, she thinks I should be open to meeting someone. Practically, she has very high standards for anyone who wants to be part of our lives, and she's incredibly protective of the independence I've worked so hard to build. What would those standards be, specifically? I appreciated that he was asking seriously rather than treating Emma's opinion as something to be charmed away or circumvented. Respect for my autonomy, no interest in changing or fixing me. Genuine care for my happiness rather than what I can provide, and absolutely no tolerance for anyone who sees her as an inconvenience or a complication. Those seem like reasonable requirements. They do, but they also eliminate most men in their 40s who are looking for someone to slot neatly into their already established lives. I took a sip of the wine Jake had ordered, a Chianti that was somehow both bold and smooth. What about you? Any experience with teenagers who might view you as a threat to their mother's well-being? No direct experience, but I have 3 younger sisters who definitely put my girlfriends through rigorous evaluation processes when I was in my 20s. Jake smiled at what was clearly a fond memory. Carmen, the youngest, once asked a woman I was dating to explain her 5-year plan and provide references. She was 14 at the time. Did the girlfriend pass the test? She lasted about 10 minutes before claiming she had a sudden migraine and needed to leave. Carmen declared it a victory for family loyalty. Smart kid. What did your sisters think of your marriage proposal to a complete stranger? Jake paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, and I could see him considering how much honesty this conversation could handle. I haven't told them about you yet. Because you're embarrassed. About asking someone you just met to marry you? Because I want to see where this goes before I subject you to the full force of Rivera family curiosity. My mother has been asking when I'm going to find a nice girl and settle down since I turned 30. If I tell her I've met someone I'm interested in, she'll want to plan our wedding before our second date. The casual mention of a second date made something warm unfurl in my chest, and I realized I was already hoping this evening would go well enough to warrant another. Traditional family? Very traditional. My parents immigrated from Mexico when I was 5, and they built their entire lives around the idea that hard work and family commitment would create opportunities for their children. They're incredibly proud of the business Carlos and I have built, but they definitely think it's time for me to focus on marriage and grandchildren. And what do you think about marriage and grandchildren? Jake was quiet for a moment, cutting his chicken marsala into precise pieces while he considered his answer. I think I've been waiting for the right person to make those things feel like possibilities, rather than obligations. I've watched too many friends get married because it seemed like the next logical step, only to end up divorced or miserable within a few years. Like David and me. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. We got married because we loved each other, but also because it was what people did after college. We never really talked about whether we wanted the same kind of life or shared the same values. We just assumed that being in love would be enough to navigate everything else. Was it enough for a while? I considered the question while watching other diners enjoy their meals, couples and families creating the kind of warm atmosphere that made restaurants like this successful. For a while, yes. When Emma was little, and our lives were busy with work and parenting, we functioned well as a team. But as she got older, and we had more time to actually talk to each other, we realized we had become strangers who happened to share a mortgage and a child. That must have been incredibly lonely. It was. Especially because from the outside, we looked like we had everything figured out. Nice house, good jobs, beautiful daughter. People envied our life, but inside it felt like we were both pretending to be people we weren't. Jake reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his, a gesture that was becoming familiar but still sent unexpected warmth up my arm. Is that why you're scared of this? Of us? Part of it. I spent 20 years trying to be the wife David wanted instead of figuring out who I actually was. I promised myself I wouldn't lose myself in someone else's expectations again. And you think I have expectations for who you should be? I think you've created an image of me based on one afternoon and one coffee date, and I'm worried that the reality of who I am might be disappointing. Sarah, what if I told you that the reality of who you are is exactly what I'm interested in? Not some idealized version, but the actual person who uses terrible passwords and worries about her daughter, and rebuilt her entire life at 46. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. But you'd want to believe it anyway? Despite my better judgment, yes. We finished dinner talking about safer topics, his business plans, my current marketing projects, books we'd read, places we'd traveled. Jake was easy to talk to, asking follow-up questions that showed he was actually listening rather than just waiting for his turn to speak. He told me about growing up in a household where English and Spanish flowed together, about learning to fix computers because his family couldn't afford to replace them when they broke, about the satisfaction of solving problems that seemed impossible to his customers. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told anyone in years, about the terror of starting my master's degree at 38, about the first business presentation I gave after returning to work full-time, about the small daily victories that had rebuilt my confidence after my divorce. Jake listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like my experiences mattered, like my perspective had value beyond its utility to someone else's life. When the server brought dessert menus, I realized we had been talking for nearly 3 hours without any of the awkward silences or forced conversation that had characterized most of my adult social interactions. Time had passed without my awareness, the way it did when I was completely absorbed in a good book or a challenging work project. I should probably head home, I said reluctantly. Emma's staying at her father's tonight, but I have an early meeting tomorrow. Of course. But before you go, can I ask you something? At this point, I think we're past the stage of asking permission for questions. Jake smiled, but his expression was more serious than it had been all evening. How do you feel about this? About us spending time together? Not the logistics or the practical concerns, but how does it feel? The question required a level of honesty I wasn't sure I was ready for. But Jake had been forthright with me from the beginning, and he deserved the same consideration. It feels like the first time in years that I've been excited about something that wasn't related to work or Emma. It feels like I'm remembering parts of myself that I thought were gone permanently. And that scares you, terrifies me. Because what if this is just novelty? What if I'm confusing the excitement of something new with actual compatibility? What if I'm setting myself up for another situation where I lose myself trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect partner? Those are all reasonable fears. But Sarah, what if none of those things happen? What if this is exactly what it feels like? Two people who genuinely like each other exploring the possibility of building something together? Then I guess we keep having dinner and see what develops. Is that a yes to a second date? That's a yes to seeing where this goes, with the understanding that I'm going to be cautious and probably overthink everything. I wouldn't expect anything else from someone smart enough to rebuild her entire life at 46. Jake walked me to my car, and when we reached my door, there was a moment of uncertainty about how to end the evening. During my marriage, goodnight rituals had become perfunctory, obligatory kisses that fulfilled form without substance. With Jake, I found myself genuinely unsure what felt appropriate or desired. "Thank you for dinner," I said, fishing my keys from my purse. "And for choosing somewhere that felt special without being overwhelming. Thank you for saying yes, even though every rational part of your brain was probably telling you to stay home and reorganize your closets instead." "How did you know about the closet reorganization?" "Lucky guess based on your systematic approach to computer file organization." I laughed, realizing that Jake was already learning to read me in ways that felt both comfortable and slightly unnerving. "Good night, Jake." "Good night, Sarah." He paused, then added, "I know this is moving fast and probably feels chaotic, but I want you to know that I meant what I said about respecting your timeline. Whatever pace feels right to you is the pace we'll go. Even if that pace is glacially slow, even if it's glacially slow. Though I reserve the right to be enthusiastic about whatever progress we do make." As I drove home through the quiet streets of Maple Ridge, I found myself replaying moments from the evening. Jake's laugh when I told him about Emma's interrogation techniques, the way he had listened when I talked about my work, the casual touch of his hand that had somehow conveyed both affection and respect for my boundaries. For the first time in years, I felt like someone had seen me clearly and decided I was worth pursuing. Not despite my complications, but including them. My townhouse felt different when I entered, though nothing had physically changed. The carefully curated spaces I had created to reflect my new independence suddenly seemed less like a sanctuary and more like a starting point. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, looking around at the life I had built from the ashes of my marriage, and wondering if I was brave enough to let someone else become part of it. Emma called just as I was getting ready for bed, her timing as impeccable as always when it came to sensing significant developments in my life. "How was your evening, Mom?" she asked without preamble. "You went somewhere, didn't you?" Your voice has that "I did something interesting" quality. "I had dinner with a friend." "What kind of friend? Work friend? Monica friend? New mysterious friend you haven't told me about yet?" "The computer repair technician invited me to dinner as a thank you for my patience during the repair process." There was a pause while Emma processed this information. "Mom, computer repair people don't usually take their customers to dinner unless something else is happening." Maybe he was just being friendly. Or maybe he was interested in you as more than a customer, and you're being deliberately vague. Because you know I'll have opinions about this development. Sometimes having a brilliant daughter was genuinely inconvenient. "Emma, it was just dinner. Nothing dramatic or life-changing. But it was nice? It was nice. And you might see him again?" "I might see him again." "Mom, are you dating someone?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, and I found myself hesitating over an answer that should have been simple. Was I dating Jake, We had shared 2 meals and several hours of conversation, but the intensity of our connection made it feel like something more significant than casual dating. "I'm getting to know someone," I said carefully. "Someone who seems kind and interesting, and worth spending time with." "How old is he?" "Why does that matter?" "Because you're asking me to trust your judgment about someone new in your life, and I want to make sure you're thinking clearly about this." "Emma, I'm 48 years old. I think I can evaluate potential romantic partners without assistance from my teenage daughter." "Mom, you've been married to Dad since before I was born. You haven't dated anyone in your entire adult life. Maybe you could use some assistance." The observation stung because it was accurate. I had no experience with modern dating, no baseline for evaluating romantic compatibility outside the context of marriage, no practice at maintaining my independence while exploring emotional intimacy with someone new. "He's 32, I said, finally. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Emma spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. 32. Yes. Mom, that's only 15 years older than me. 16 years, actually. And yes, I'm aware of the age difference. Are you having some kind of midlife crisis? Because if you are, we should probably discuss healthier ways to handle it." "I'm not having a midlife crisis. I'm simply getting to know someone who seems genuinely interested in me as a person. Someone who's barely older than your daughter." "Emma, age is just numbers. What matters is compatibility and respect and genuine affection. Age is not just numbers, Mom. Age is life experience and cultural references, and where you are in terms of career and family planning, and about a million other factors that affect compatibility." I could hear the concern in my daughter's voice, and it made my chest tighten with guilt. Emma had been my closest ally through the divorce, supporting my decisions and celebrating my independence. The last thing I wanted was for her to worry that I was making choices that might hurt me. "I understand your concerns," I said gently, "and I promise I'm being careful and thoughtful about this. I'm not rushing into anything or making dramatic life changes based on one dinner." "But you like him?" "I like him. And he likes you. He seems to like me." "Mom, what if this doesn't work out? What if he decides he wants someone his own age who can give him kids and doesn't come with a teenage daughter and a complicated divorce history?" The question articulated fears I had been trying not to examine too closely. What if Jake's interest was based on novelty rather than genuine compatibility? What if the age difference became problematic as we got to know each other better? What if I was setting myself up for another devastating rejection? "Then I'll handle it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Emma, I survived a 20-year marriage ending and rebuilt my entire life. I think I can handle one relationship not working out. I just don't want you to get hurt again." "I know, sweetheart. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life avoiding possibilities because they might not work out perfectly. Sometimes you have to take risks to find something good. Just promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll talk to me if you need advice or support, or someone to tell you if you're making a terrible mistake." "I promise. And Emma, thank you for caring enough to worry about me, even when it's inconvenient for my dating life." After we hung up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the questions Emma had raised. Was I being naive about the age difference? Was Jake interested in me as a person? Or was I some kind of novelty that would lose its appeal once he got to know me better? Was I setting myself up for heartbreak by pursuing something that defied conventional wisdom about appropriate relationships? But underneath those doubts, I could feel something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not anxiety about potential problems, but genuine excitement about the possibility of discovering something unexpected and meaningful. For the first time since my divorce, I was looking forward to tomorrow not because of work accomplishments or parental milestones, but because I might get to talk to someone who made me feel like the most interesting version of myself. Jake texted me as I was finally drifting off to sleep. "Thank you for tonight. I hope you sleep well and don't spend too much time overthinking everything we talked about." I stared at the message, amazed at how accurately he had predicted my late night mental state, and typed back, "Too late. Already overthinking. But thank you for a lovely evening." His response came immediately. Good. Overthinking means it mattered enough to think about. Sleep well, Sarah. As I finally fell asleep, I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't making mental lists of tasks for the next day, or worrying about work deadlines or Emma's college applications. Instead, I was wondering what Jake was thinking about as he fell asleep, and whether he was looking forward to our next conversation as much as I was. 3 weeks into what I had started calling the Jake situation in my head, my carefully constructed, post-divorce life began showing cracks in ways I hadn't anticipated. It started with small things. Arriving at work with a smile that had nothing to do with quarterly reports, finding myself checking my phone for messages during meetings, and catching my reflection in windows to see if I looked like someone who was quietly falling for a man 16 years her junior. Monica noticed first, because Monica had developed supernatural powers of observation during her own divorce proceedings 2 years earlier. We were having our usual Tuesday lunch at the sandwich place near my office when she set down her turkey club and fixed me with the kind of stare that had probably terrified her students during her teaching days. "Okay, spill it," she said without preamble. "You've been glowing like someone who discovered a secret room full of chocolate, and don't try to tell me it's because you finally figured out your backup system." "I don't know what you mean," said, focusing intently on my salad, as if the arrangement of lettuce leaves required my complete attention. "Sarah Chen, we have been friends for 26 years. I have seen you through bad haircuts, worse boyfriends, David's proposal, Emma's birth, and your divorce. I know every expression you've ever made, and this is a new one." Monica leaned forward conspiratorially. "Someone has been making you happy in ways that have nothing to do with your professional accomplishments or your daughter's achievements." The accuracy of her observation made my cheeks warm, and I realized that trying to hide anything from Monica was like trying to hide a sunburn in a bikini. The computer repair technician asked me to dinner. And we've been seeing each other. Monica's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Seeing each other how? Like professional follow-up meetings, or like actual dating? Like actual dating. How many dates? 4. The number sounded both insignificant and momentous when I said it out loud. 4 dinners, 2 coffee dates, 1 afternoon walk through Riverside Park, where Jake had patiently explained why my phone kept running out of storage space while I tried not to focus on how his hands moved when he talked. 4 dates in 3 weeks? Sarah, that's practically a relationship by post-divorce standards. Monica paused. "Wait, how old is this guy? Does it matter?" The fact that you're avoiding the question suggests it absolutely matters. "He's 32. Monica set down her sandwich completely. 32? As in, born in the 1990s, 32? Monica, please don't make this into something scandalous. He's a successful business owner, he's intelligent and kind, and he treats me with more respect than I experienced in 20 years of marriage. I'm not making it scandalous. I'm just processing the fact that you're dating someone who was probably learning to drive when you were getting married. When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is." "How does it sound when you put it?" I considered the question while watching office workers hurry past our window, all of them moving through their predictable days with the kind of certainty I had lost somewhere between my computer crashing and Jake Rivera asking me to marry him within 30 minutes of meeting me. "It sounds like the first time in years that someone has looked at me and seen possibilities instead of limitations," I said finally. "It sounds like someone who doesn't want to fix me or change me or slot me into their pre-existing life plan." Monica's expression softened. "But what does it feel like, Sarah? Not what it sounds like or what it might represent, but what does it actually feel like to be with him?" The question made me pause, because I hadn't allowed myself to examine that too closely. It feels like I'm remembering who I was before. I spent 20 years trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect wife. It feels like conversations where I don't have to translate my thoughts into something more palatable. It feels like someone chose me, not because I was convenient or available, but because something about me specifically appealed to him. And the age thing doesn't bother you? It should bother me more than it does. But when we're talking, or sharing a meal, or just sitting quietly together, I don't think about our ages. I think about how easy it is to be myself around him. Monica nodded slowly. "Just promise me you're being careful. Not about the age difference, but about your heart. You've spent 2 years rebuilding yourself. and I don't want to see you lose that for anyone, regardless of how wonderful they seem. I promise. And Monica? Thank you for not immediately telling me I'm making a terrible mistake. Oh, I reserve the right to tell you that later if circumstances warrant it. But for now, I'm just glad to see you looking happy again. That evening, Jake picked me up for dinner at a new restaurant in Hartford that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine and had supposedly earned rave reviews from food critics who used words like transcendent and revelatory. I had spent more time getting ready than I cared to admit, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a burgundy dress that Emma had helped me pick out during a rare mother-daughter shopping expedition. "You look beautiful," Jake said. When I opened the door, and something about the way he said it made me believe he was seeing me rather than just offering obligatory compliments. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive but not flashy, and I realized that during our previous dates, I had focused so much on our conversations that I hadn't fully appreciated how attractive he was. Not just physically, though the combination of dark hair, warm eyes, and genuine smile was certainly appealing, but attractive in the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence and treated everyone from restaurant servers to parking attendants with the same courtesy he showed me. The drive to Hartford gave us time to talk about our respective days. Jake told me about a particularly challenging repair job involving a laptop that had been subjected to what he described as aggressive creative enhancement by a 6-year-old with permanent markers and glitter glue. I shared the latest developments in a marketing campaign for a sustainable energy company, and Jake asked thoughtful questions about renewable technology that showed he had been paying attention to things I mentioned in previous conversations. "I have something to tell you," Jake said as we waited for our table at the restaurant. "Carlos thinks I should bring you to meet my family." The announcement made my stomach flutter with something that was equal parts anticipation and terror. "What did you tell him about me?" "That I'm seeing someone who makes me want to be better at everything I do. That I've never felt this comfortable with anyone before. That I think I might be falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us like a question waiting for an answer. We had been dancing around deeper feelings for weeks, acknowledging attraction and compatibility, while carefully avoiding the more overwhelming implications of what was developing between us. "Jake," I said quietly, "are you sure you're not confusing intensity with love? We've known each other for less than a month. Sarah, I've had relationships that lasted years where I never felt as certain about someone as I feel about you right now. Time isn't always about duration. But love requires knowing someone deeply, understanding their flaws and fears and how they handle stress and disappointment. You've seen the best version of me, the woman who's carefully put together for dates and conversations. You haven't seen me at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep because I'm worried about Emma's college applications, or when I'm dealing with a difficult client and taking my frustration out on innocent household objects. Then let me see those versions of you too. Let me be there when things are complicated and messy instead of just during the carefully orchestrated perfect moments." That's a beautiful sentiment, but relationships that move this fast tend to crash just as quickly when reality sets in. Jake was quiet for a moment, and I could see him considering how to respond to my practical concerns without dismissing the emotional truth of what he had said. "What if we're approaching this backwards?" he said finally. "What if instead of worrying about whether we're moving too fast, we focus on whether we're moving in the right direction? What would that look like?" "It would look like me meeting Emma, because she's the most important person in your life, and I need to understand what kind of man would be worthy of both of you. It would look like you meeting my family, because they're going to be part of this equation whether we like it or not. It would look like us having the practical conversations about what we want and need from a relationship, instead of just enjoying the romance." The server called our name before I could respond, and we were led to a table near a window that looked out onto Hartford's downtown lights. The restaurant was exactly as advertised, elegant without being pretentious, innovative without being weird, expensive enough to feel special but not so expensive that Jake's insistence on paying would create financial stress for his business. Over dinner, we talked about the practical questions Jake had mentioned. He wanted to know about my long-term career goals, whether I planned to stay in Maple Ridge permanently, how I felt about the possibility of more children. I asked about his business expansion plans his relationship with his family, whether he had ever lived with a romantic partner before. "I want you to know," Jake said over dessert that tasted like coffee and chocolate had achieved perfect harmony, "that I understand the risks you're taking by being with me. I know that dating someone my age probably seems impractical to your friends and family. I know that people are going to have opinions about us, and not all of them will be kind. And how do you feel about being someone's controversial choice? I feel like you're worth any amount of social inconvenience, but I also feel responsible for making sure this relationship enhances your life rather than complicating it unnecessarily. Jake, any relationship is going to complicate my life. The question is whether the complications are worth the benefits. And what's your current assessment?" I looked across the table at this man who had somehow become central to my happiness in less than a month, who asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers, who treated my independence as an asset rather than an obstacle, and realized that the practical concerns everyone kept raising felt insignificant compared to how I felt when I was with him. "My current assessment is that I'd like you to meet Emma," I said. "And I'd like to meet your family. And I'd like to see what happens when we stop being careful and start being honest about what we want." Jake's smile was so bright it could have powered the restaurant's lighting system. "Are you sure?" "No, I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of making decisions based on what might go wrong instead of what might go right." "When do you want to arrange the Emma meeting?" "This weekend. She's been asking increasingly pointed questions about my social activities, and I think she'll respect directness more than continued evasion." "And my family? Whenever you think they're ready to meet a 48-year-old woman who might be dating their son for reasons that don't make conventional sense. They're going to love you. My mother has been praying for someone to make me stop working 7 days a week and start thinking about the future. The fact that you're successful and independent will impress her more than your age will concern her." "What about your father?" "My father will ask if you make me happy and whether you can cook traditional Mexican food. The first answer is obvious, and I'll warn you about the second question so you can prepare an appropriately diplomatic response. I make excellent tacos from a kit. We'll work on your culinary skills before the family dinner." As Jake drove me home, I found myself thinking about the conversation with Emma I would need to have. My daughter had been patient with my vague references to seeing someone, but introducing Jake would require explaining the age difference, the intensity of our connection, and why I believe this relationship was worth pursuing despite its unconventional aspects. "Are you nervous about Emma?" Jake asked, as if he had been reading my thoughts. "Terrified. She's protective of me, and she has strong opinions about people who might hurt me. Plus, she's 17, and naturally suspicious of any adult who claims to understand love after knowing someone for 3 weeks. What do you think she'll think of me? Honestly? She'll probably grill you like you're applying for a security clearance. She'll want to know your intentions, your long-term plans, and whether you understand what it means to be involved with someone who has a teenage daughter. Those are reasonable questions. What should my answers be? Truthful ones. Emma has a remarkable ability to detect insincerity, and she'll respect honest answers even if she doesn't like them. And what are the honest answers, from your perspective?" I considered the question as we pulled into my driveway. What were Jake's intentions? What did I hope his long-term plans included? What did it mean for him to be involved with someone whose life was already fully formed and complicated? "I think your intentions are to see where this relationship leads, without forcing it into predetermined categories. I think your long-term plans include building a life with someone who challenges and supports you. And I think you understand that being involved with me means accepting Emma as part of the equation, not as an obstacle to overcome." "That's exactly right. Do you think Emma will believe that?" "I think Emma will test it extensively before she decides whether to believe it." Jake walked me to my door, and we stood on my front porch looking at each other with the kind of anticipation that comes before significant life changes. I knew that introducing him to Emma would shift our relationship from private exploration to public acknowledgement, that meeting his family would require defending choices I wasn't entirely sure I could explain rationally. "Sarah," Jake said, softly, "before we take these next steps, I want you to know that I meant what I said earlier about falling in love with you. I know it's fast, and probably seems impossible, but I've never felt as certain about anything as I feel about us." Jake, I'm falling in love with you too. It scares me and exhilarates me, and makes me question everything I thought I knew about appropriate relationship timelines. But it's true. So, we're really doing this? Taking the risk that everyone will think we're crazy? We're really doing this. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and I realized that standing on my front porch with Jake Rivera felt more like home than anywhere I had been in years. When we broke apart, I could see Mrs. Patterson peering through her curtains with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for sporting events. But for once, I didn't care who was watching or what conclusions they might draw. The next morning, Emma called earlier than usual, her timing as impeccable as always when it came to sensing major developments in my life. "Mom, we need to talk," she announced without preamble. "I'm coming over after school, and I want to meet this person you've been seeing." "Emma, I was planning to discuss that with you this weekend." "Discussion time is over. Dad mentioned that Mrs. Patterson told him she saw you kissing someone on the front porch last night. A young someone, according to her detailed report. So either you're going to introduce me to this guy, or I'm going to track him down myself and conduct my own investigation." The thought of Emma conducting an independent investigation into Jake's background was genuinely terrifying. "I'll call him and see if he's free this evening." "Good. And Mom, I hope you know what you're doing, because if this guy breaks your heart, I will destroy him in ways that would impress organized crime families." "Emma, violence is never the answer." "I didn't say anything about violence. I said I would destroy him. There are much more creative ways to ruin someone's life than physical harm." After we hung up, I called Jake to warn him about the accelerated timeline for meeting my daughter. "She wants to meet me tonight?" he asked, and I could hear both nervousness and amusement in his voice. "She's received intelligence from neighborhood surveillance about our relationship status, and she's decided that the time for gentle introductions has passed. What should I expect?" "Expect to be thoroughly evaluated by someone who has been protecting my interests for 17 years and takes that responsibility very seriously. Expect questions about your background, your intentions, and your understanding of what it means to date someone with a teenage daughter. And expect to be judged not on whether Emma likes you, but on whether she believes you're good for me." Any advice for passing the Emma test? Be yourself. Answer her questions honestly. And remember that her protective instincts come from love, even if they feel like an interrogation. Should I bring anything? Flowers? Food? Character references? Just yourself. And Jake, thank you for being willing to do this. I know it's not exactly a typical fourth date activity. Sarah, nothing about our relationship has been typical. I'm not going to start expecting normal now. That evening, I spent an embarrassing amount of time preparing for what was essentially a casual dinner at my own house. I cleaned everything twice, planned a menu that wouldn't require too much attention so I could focus on facilitating conversation between Jake and Emma, and changed clothes 4 times before settling on jeans and a sweater that said, "Relaxed but still making an effort." Emma arrived home from school with the kind of determined energy that usually preceded major life decisions or dramatic confrontations. She had inherited my tendency toward overthinking and David's stubborn streak, a combination that made her formidable when she decided something required her attention. "So," she said, dropping her backpack in the hallway and fixing me with a stare that would have made corporate executives nervous. "Tell me about this guy before he gets here." "His name is Jake Rivera. He's 32, he owns a computer repair business, and he's been very kind to me." "Kind how?" "He listens when I talk. He asks thoughtful questions. He treats me with respect, and he seems to genuinely enjoy my company." "And you like him?" "I like him very much." "Mom, are you in love with him?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, and I found myself hesitating over an answer that should have been simple. "I think I might be," I said finally. "And he's in love with you?" "He says he is." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, but you know that being in love and being compatible for a long-term relationship are completely different things, right?" "Yes, Emma. I'm aware of that distinction." "And you know that dating someone who's closer to my age than to yours is going to create complications you probably haven't considered yet? We've discussed the age difference extensively. Have you discussed the fact that he's probably never lived with a teenager? Or that he might want kids of his own someday?" or that his friends are all going to be in their 20s and 30s while you're approaching 50. Emma, these are all valid concerns, but they're not insurmountable obstacles. They're not obstacles if you're just dating casually, but if you're falling in love with each other, they become much more significant. The doorbell rang before I could respond, and Emma straightened her shoulders like someone preparing for battle. "Remember," I said quietly as we walked toward the front door. "He's nervous about meeting you too." "Good. Nervous people tell the truth." I opened the door to find Jake standing on my porch holding a small bouquet of flowers that looked like they had been carefully selected rather than grabbed from a grocery store display. He was wearing dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt, and he looked exactly like someone who was about to meet his girlfriend's protective teenage daughter for the first time. "Emma," I said, "this is Jake Rivera. Jake, this is my daughter, Emma." "It's nice to meet you, Emma," Jake said, extending his hand for a handshake. "Your mom talks about you constantly." "She talks about you too," Emma replied, shaking his hand and studying his face with the kind of intensity usually reserved for scientific experiments, though she's been frustratingly vague about details. "Well, I'm here now, so you can ask me anything you want to know." I intend to. Dinner conversation was unlike anything I had experienced in my adult life. Emma approached the evening like a journalist conducting an investigative interview, asking Jake questions about his family background, his business philosophy, his previous relationships, and his long-term goals with a kind of systematic thoroughness that made me proud and embarrassed in equal measure. Jake answered everything honestly and thoughtfully, never talking down to Emma or treating her questions as less important than adult concerns. When she asked about the age difference, he acknowledged that it created complications but explained why he believed compatibility was more important than conventional timelines. When she asked about his intentions regarding me, he said he was hoping to build something lasting with someone he respected and cared about deeply. "What happens if you get tired of dating someone who's old enough to be your mother?" Emma asked bluntly, and I nearly choked on my water. "Emma," I said, but Jake held up a hand. "It's a fair question," he said, looking directly at Emma. "First, your mother isn't old enough to be my mother unless she had me when she was 16, which seems unlikely. Second, I'm not dating her because of her age or despite her age. I'm dating her because she's intelligent and funny and treats people with kindness, and because being with her makes me want to be better at everything I do. And what if you want kids someday? Then your mother and I will have a conversation about whether that's something she's interested in pursuing, and we'll make decisions based on what works for both of us. What if she doesn't want more kids? Then I'll decide whether having children is more important to me than having your mother in my life." Emma nodded slowly, and I could see her processing this information. "And what if your friends think it's weird that you're dating someone so much older than you? Then I'll probably need better friends. What about your family?" "My family wants me to be happy. If your mother makes me happy, which she does, then they'll support our relationship, even if other people think it's inappropriate." "Emma, there will always be people who have opinions about other people's choices. The question is whether you're going to live your life according to what makes you happy, or according to what makes other people comfortable." By the time we reached dessert, Emma had relaxed enough to start asking Jake about his interests and experiences rather than his qualifications for dating her mother. They discovered a shared interest in environmental technology, and Jake told Emma about some of the sustainable business practices he and Carlos had implemented in their company. "He's not terrible," Emma announced after Jake left, and we were cleaning up the kitchen. High praise from someone who was prepared to conduct a background check and psychological evaluation. "Mom, I was serious about protecting you from making a mistake. But I don't think Jake is a mistake." "What changed your mind?" He answered my questions like he understood why I was asking them instead of getting defensive or trying to charm his way past my concerns. "And he looked at you during dinner like you were the most interesting person in the room, even when I was being deliberately difficult." "You were not deliberately difficult." "Mom, I asked him about his previous relationships, his financial stability, and his family's immigration status. I was absolutely deliberately difficult." "And what did you conclude from his answers?" I concluded that he's either genuinely in love with you or he's an extremely sophisticated manipulator. And since sophisticated manipulators usually target people with money or status rather than marketing directors in suburban Connecticut, I'm going with genuinely in love. That's reassuring, I think. Mom, there's something else. What? I've never seen you look the way you looked tonight. During dinner, when Jake was talking, you looked like you were exactly where you wanted to be. I haven't seen that expression on your face since before you and Dad started having problems. The observation made my chest tight with emotion I wasn't prepared for. Emma, you know I love you more than anything in the world, right? And that no relationship will ever change that? I know, Mom. And you know that I want you to be happy, even if it means dating someone who's practically young enough to be my older brother. He's not that young. Mom, when I graduate from college, he'll be 36. That's not exactly ancient. Are you okay with this, really? Emma was quiet for a moment, loading plates into the dishwasher with the kind of careful attention that meant she was thinking seriously about her answer. I'm okay with you being happy, she said finally. I'm okay with you taking risks if they might lead to something good. And I'm okay with Jake, as long as he keeps treating you like you're someone special instead of someone convenient. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll deal with it together, like we deal with everything else. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in Jake's parents' driveway, in a neighborhood 20 minutes outside of Hartford, holding a bottle of wine and trying to calm my nerves about meeting the family of a man I had known for 6 weeks and was somehow already planning a future with. The Rivera house was a modest 2-story colonial with a carefully maintained garden and the kind of welcoming front porch that suggested people who valued family gatherings and community connections. Jake's mother, Maria, answered the door before we finished climbing the front steps, and I could immediately see where Jake had inherited his warm eyes and genuine smile. You must be Sarah, she said, pulling me into a hug that felt both motherly and evaluative. Jake has told us so much about you. Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Rivera. I brought wine, though I should probably mention that I know nothing about wine pairings, so I hope it's appropriate. Call me Maria, and any wine that comes with a pretty woman who makes my son smile is perfect. Jake's father, Carlos Sr., was quieter but equally welcoming, shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested both strength and respect. The house smelled like garlic and cumin, and something that might have been fresh bread, and I could hear laughter and conversation coming from what was presumably the kitchen. How many people are here? I asked Jake quietly, as Maria led us through the living room toward the sounds of family gathering. Just immediate family. My parents, my 3 sisters, Carlos Jr. and his wife, and maybe 1 or 2 family friends, who happened to be in the neighborhood. Jake, that's not immediate family. That's a small convention. You'll be fine. Just be yourself, and don't let my sisters intimidate you with their questions about your intentions. The kitchen was indeed full of people, all of whom seemed to be talking at once while somehow simultaneously contributing to meal preparation. Jake's sisters ranged in age from 19 to 28, and all 3 of them had inherited the family's expressive eyes and tendency toward direct communication. So you're the woman who's making our brother act like a human being instead of a computer repair robot, said Carmen, the youngest, approaching me with the kind of confident friendliness that suggested she'd been deputized as the family's official greeter. I don't know about that, I said. Your brother was pretty human when I met him. That's diplomatic, said Sophia, the middle sister. But Jake has been working 7 days a week for 3 years, and suddenly he's taking evenings off and actually returning our phone calls. Something significant has changed. Maybe he's just learning to balance work and personal life better. Or maybe he's in love, said Isabella, the oldest sister, with the kind of knowing smile that suggested she had already drawn her own conclusions about Jake's recent behavior. Changes. During dinner, which featured more food than seemed physically possible to consume and conversation that flowed between English and Spanish, with the kind of natural ease that comes from families who genuinely enjoy each other's company, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't expected. Jake's family was curious about me, but their questions felt like genuine interest rather than suspicious interrogation. Maria asked about my work, and when I explained what marketing directors actually do, she immediately began describing challenges, her church was having with community outreach and asking for my professional opinion. Carlos Sr. wanted to know about Emma's college plans and seemed genuinely impressed when I told him about her environmental engineering aspirations. "Smart daughter," he said, nodding approvingly. "Education is the most important investment parents can make." "Emma is much smarter than both her parents combined," I said. "She keeps us both humble." "Good children do that," Maria added. "They teach us that wisdom doesn't always come with age." After dinner, while the dishes were being cleared and dessert was being prepared, Jake's sisters cornered me in the living room with what was clearly a coordinated effort to assess my suitability for their brother. "So," Carmen said without preamble, "what are your intentions toward Jake?" "My intentions? Are you looking for something casual, or are you serious about him?" Sophia clarified. "Because Jake doesn't do casual very well, and we don't want to see him get hurt by someone who's just experimenting with younger men." The directness of the question caught me off guard, but I appreciated that Jake's sisters cared enough about his well-being to risk being rude to someone they had just met. "I'm serious about him," I said. "More serious than I expected to be, and more serious than is probably sensible given how recently we met." "But you're aware of the age difference," Isabella said, "and the complications that might create." "Very aware. We've discussed it extensively. And you're okay with dating someone who's probably never lived with a woman long-term, who's never been married, who doesn't have experience with teenage children?" "I'm okay with learning how to navigate those challenges together. And he's okay with learning how to be part of a life that's already complicated and fully formed." "What if he wants kids?" Carmen asked bluntly. "Then we'll have a conversation about whether that's something I'm interested in pursuing at this stage of my life. And if it's not? Then we'll decide whether having children is more important to him than having me in his life." The sisters exchanged glances that suggested some kind of silent communication was taking place. "Jake told us you have a teenage daughter," Sophia said. "How does she feel about you dating someone closer to her age than yours?" She was initially concerned, but after meeting Jake, she decided he was acceptable provided he continues treating me well. "Smart kid," Isabella said approvingly. "Very smart, and very protective of my happiness." "Good, someone should be." By the time Jake and I left his family's house, I felt like I'd been thoroughly evaluated and somehow managed to pass whatever tests had been administered. Jake's family was warm and welcoming, but also clearly devoted to each other's well-being. And I could see why he had grown up with such a strong sense of loyalty and commitment. "That went well," Jake said, as we drove back toward Maple Ridge. "Your family is wonderful, but I feel like I just survived some kind of benevolent interrogation process." "That's because you did. My sisters have been known to make unsuitable girlfriends cry and leave early." "Have there been many unsuitable girlfriends?" "A few. Women who thought dating someone with a close family meant they could skip the effort of getting to know that family. Women who saw my business as a stepping stone to something more prestigious. Women who wanted to change fundamental things about who I am." "And what did they think of me?" "They think you're perfect for me. Carmen told my mother you were obviously smart enough to keep Jake from making stupid decisions, which is high praise from someone who once described a previous girlfriend as decorative but not functional." "I'm glad I passed the family approval test. Sarah, there's something I want to ask you." The serious tone in his voice made me turn to look at him more carefully. "What is it?" "I know we've been taking things slowly and being careful not to rush into anything too dramatic, but I've been thinking about our future, about what it might look like if we decide this relationship is worth pursuing long-term." "And what do you think it might look like?" "I think it might look like me moving out of my apartment and finding a place closer to you and Emma. I think it might look like us combining our lives in ways that make sense for both of us. I think it might eventually look like marriage, if that's something you'd be interested in considering." "Jake, are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd be interested in exploring the possibility of building a life together. Not immediately, but as a goal we're working toward." I was quiet for several minutes, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood come into view and thinking about what Jake was suggesting. Moving in together would mean combining our established routines, finding ways to blend his social life with mine, figuring out how to make space for each other in lives that were already full and complicated. "What would that mean for Emma?" I asked finally. It would mean becoming part of her life in a more significant way. Being someone she can count on, not just as your boyfriend, but as someone who cares about her well-being independent of my feelings for you. And what would it mean for your business? It would mean maybe expanding our service area to include more of your part of Connecticut. Carlos has been wanting to hire additional technicians anyway. Jake, are you seriously considering rearranging your entire life around a relationship that's less than 2 months old? I'm seriously considering rearranging my life around the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. The timeline is less important than the certainty. And you're certain about me? Sarah, I was certain about you 30 minutes after meeting you. Everything since then has just been confirmation. We pulled into my driveway, and I could see lights on in my townhouse where Emma was presumably doing homework or texting friends about whatever 17-year-olds found urgently important on Friday evenings. My life looked exactly the same as it had 2 months ago, but everything felt completely different. I need to think about this, I said finally. Not because I don't want to be with you, but because combining lives is complicated when those lives already include other people and responsibilities. Of course, take all the time you need. But Sarah, while you're thinking, remember that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that feel scary but right, rather than safe but limiting. Is that your answer to everything? Take the scary option that feels right? It's worked pretty well so far. As I got ready for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the evening with Jake's family and the conversation about our future. For 2 years, I had focused on building independence and self-sufficiency, on creating a life that belonged entirely to me and didn't require anyone else's approval or participation. The idea of voluntarily giving up some of that independence for the sake of partnership was both appealing and terrifying. Emma knocked on my bedroom door just as I was settling into bed with a cup of tea and the kind of swirling thoughts that typically preceded major life decisions. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked, poking her head into my room with the expression she wore when something important was weighing on her mind. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." Emma perched on the edge of my bed, drawing her knees up to her chest, in the position she had favored for serious conversations since she was small. "I've been thinking about you and Jake." "What about us? About whether this is really what you want, or whether you're just enjoying the excitement of something new and different." The question was more perceptive than I had expected from my 17-year-old daughter, and it forced me to examine motivations I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. "What makes you ask that?" "Because I've watched you rebuild your entire life over the past 2 years. You've become independent and confident and successful on your own terms. And now you're talking about combining your life with someone you've known for 6 weeks. Emma, people don't always follow predictable timelines when it comes to important connections. I know that, Mom. But I also know that you spent 20 years in a marriage where you gradually lost pieces of yourself, trying to be what someone else needed. I don't want to see you do that again, even with someone who seems as nice as Jake." Her concern made my chest tight with emotion, because it reflected the same fears I had been wrestling with since Jake first mentioned building a life together. Was I falling in love with Jake as a person, or was I simply intoxicated by the novelty of being chosen by someone who seemed to value me exactly as I was? "What if I told you that being with Jake makes me feel more like myself rather than less?" I said carefully. "Then I'd ask you to explain what that means." "It means that when I'm with him, I don't feel like I need to edit my thoughts or moderate my opinions or present a more palatable version of myself. It means he asks for my professional advice and actually listens to my answers. It means he treats my independence as something valuable rather than something threatening." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "And you trust that those things will continue if you move in together? That he won't gradually start expecting you to prioritize his needs over your own goals?" "I trust that Jake and I can have conversations about expectations and boundaries that your father and I never learned to have. I trust that if problems develop, we'll address them directly, rather than letting them fester. But you can't be certain." "Emma, certainty is impossible in any relationship. The question is whether the potential benefits justify the risks involved. And in this case, they do." I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had supported me through the most difficult period of my life, and who was now preparing to leave for college while worrying about my emotional well-being, and realized that part of loving her well meant showing her that it was possible to choose happiness even when it required courage. Yes, I think they do. Jake makes me feel hopeful about the future in ways I haven't experienced since before. Your father and I started having problems. He makes me want to take risks and try new things and believe that good things can happen unexpectedly. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll survive it, just like I survived the divorce. But Emma, I don't want to spend the rest of my life making decisions based on worst-case scenarios. Emma was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her processing everything I had said with the kind of careful consideration that made me proud of the person she was becoming. I have one condition, she said finally. What's that? If you and Jake decide to live together, I want to be involved in the conversation about how that affects me. I'm going to college in 10 months, but until then, any changes to our living situation impact my life too. That's absolutely fair. Any major decisions will include your input, and I want you to promise that you won't lose yourself in this relationship the way you did with Dad. That you'll keep your own friends and interests and goals instead of just adopting his. I promise. And Emma, thank you for caring enough to have this conversation with me. I know it's not easy to watch your mother navigate romantic relationships. It's weird, but it's also kind of cool to see you happy again. Just don't do anything too embarrassing when I bring friends over. Define embarrassing. Public displays of affection, using terms of endearment in front of my classmates, or wearing anything that could be described as cute couple clothing. I think I can manage those requirements. After Emma went to her room, I lay in bed thinking about the conversation Jake and I needed to have about practical details. If we were serious about building a life together, we would need to discuss everything from household responsibilities to financial arrangements to how we would handle holidays and family obligations. The romantic excitement of unexpected connection would need to be balanced with the mundane realities of sharing space and making joint decisions. I called Jake the next morning while Emma was at her weekend job, and I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, looking around at the space I had carefully curated as a symbol of my independence. I've been thinking about what you said last night, I told him without preamble. And I think we should have the practical conversations before we make any definitive decisions about moving in together. What kind of practical conversations? Money, for starters. How we would handle expenses and bill paying and financial decision-making. Household responsibilities and how we would divide domestic labor. Your business and whether combining our lives would affect your partnership with Carlos. My work and whether living together would impact my travel schedule or client commitments. Those are all important topics. When do you want to have these conversations? How about now? Can you come over and we'll make lists and talk through everything? Like the responsible adults we're supposed to be? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jake arrived with coffee from Brew and Bean and a legal pad that suggested he had already been thinking about practical considerations. We sat at my dining room table like we were conducting a business meeting, which felt both ridiculous and reassuring, given the magnitude of what we were contemplating. Finances first, I said, uncapping a pen with the kind of determination usually reserved for tax preparation. How do you envision handling money if we live together? Honestly, I haven't thought much beyond hoping we could find a fair way to split shared expenses while maintaining some individual financial independence. What does fair mean to you? Proportional to income, maybe? Since you probably earn more than I do as a marketing director. Actually, I have no idea what you earn. We've never discussed specific numbers. Jake looked slightly embarrassed. Carlos and I are doing well, but we're still building the business. I'm probably making about 2/3 of what you make, if I had to guess. Then proportional contributions. Make sense. But Jake, what about bigger financial decisions? Car purchases, vacation planning, emergency expenses. Joint discussion for anything over a certain threshold? Say, $500? That seems reasonable. What about savings and retirement planning? Individual responsibility with optional coordination if we decide to plan for shared long-term goals. We worked through household responsibilities with the same systematic approach, discussing everything from grocery shopping to cleaning schedules to yard maintenance. Jake was surprisingly thoughtful about domestic logistics, and I realized that living alone for several years had taught him skills that David had never developed during our marriage. What about Emma? I asked as we moved through our list. How do you see yourself fitting into her life if we're living together? I'd like to be someone she can count on for practical support and emotional consistency, but I don't want to try to replace her father or override your parenting decisions. And when she brings friends over or needs space to be a teenager without adult supervision, then I'll make myself scarce or find reasons to visit Carlos. Emma's comfort in her own home is more important than my convenience. What about discipline or household rules? That's your territory unless you specifically ask for my input. I might have opinions, but they're just opinions unless you want them to be more than that. We spent 3 hours working through practical considerations, and by the end of our conversation, I felt like we had created a framework for combining our lives that respected both our individual needs and our shared goals. More importantly, I felt like Jake approached the prospect of partnership with the same thoughtfulness he brought to our relationship in general. There's one more thing we should discuss, I said as we finished our lists. What's that? The timeline. How quickly do you want to make this happen? What feels right to you? Honestly, I'd like to wait until after Emma graduates from high school. She's dealing with college applications and senior year stress, and I don't want to add the complexity of a major household change to everything else she's managing. That makes perfect sense. So we're talking about next summer? Probably. Unless something changes dramatically in our relationship or our circumstances. Sarah, are you sure you want to wait that long? 8 months is a significant amount of time. Jake, I've spent 2 years learning to make decisions based on what's best for Emma and me rather than what's most convenient or exciting. Waiting until she graduates feels like the right choice for our family. Then we wait. But in the meantime, can we start spending more time together? Maybe I could stay over occasionally, or you could come to my place sometimes. I'd like that, as long as we're thoughtful about how we introduce those changes to Emma. Of course, as Jake prepared to leave, I realized that our practical conversation had somehow made the prospect of building a life together feel more real rather than less romantic. The fact that we could discuss financial arrangements and household logistics without conflict or resentment suggested a level of compatibility that went beyond physical attraction or emotional intensity. Jake, I said as he reached for his jacket, I need you to know that this decision isn't just about you and me. It's about Emma's well-being and my own emotional security, and the kind of life I want to build for the next 20 years. I understand, and I want you to know that I don't take any of that responsibility lightly. Good. Because if we do this, if we really combine our lives, it needs to be forever. I can't go through another divorce, and Emma can't go through another major family disruption. Sarah, when I asked you to marry me on the day we met, I wasn't joking or being impulsive. I was recognizing something fundamental about what I wanted for my future. That hasn't changed. Even knowing how complicated it will be, even understanding all the practical challenges we just discussed, especially knowing all of that. Sarah, complicated doesn't scare me if it comes with the right person. That afternoon, while Emma was still at work, I called Monica to update her on the latest developments and what she had started calling the Jake situation. You're moving in with him? She asked, and I could hear both excitement and concern in her voice. We're planning to move in together next summer after Emma graduates. And Monica, we spent 3 hours this morning discussing practical logistics like responsible adults. 3 hours? What did you talk about for 3 hours? Money, household, responsibilities, parenting boundaries, timeline expectations. All the boring but important stuff that people should discuss before they combine their lives. And you're both still excited about living together after discussing the boring but important stuff? More excited, actually. It turns out that being able to have practical conversations without drama or conflict is incredibly attractive. Sarah, I have to ask, are you sure you're not just enjoying the novelty of being with someone who treats you well? Because the contrast with David might be making Jake seem more wonderful than he actually is. The question made me pause, because it echoed concerns I had been wrestling with privately. Was my attraction to Jake based on genuine compatibility, or was I simply grateful to be treated with respect and consideration after years of feeling invisible in my marriage? Monica, I've been asking myself the same question. But here's what I've realized. Even if the contrast with David is influencing my feelings, that doesn't make those feelings less valid. Jake makes me happy. He makes me feel valued and interesting, and capable. Whether that's because he's objectively wonderful or because he's wonderful compared to what I'm used to, doesn't change the fact that being with him enhances my life. As long as you're being honest with yourself about what you're choosing and why. I think I am. And Monica, for the first time in years, I'm excited about the future instead of just trying to survive the present. Then I'm happy for you. Just promise me you'll keep being honest with yourself if things change or if problems develop. I promise. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning in March, watching Jake make pancakes while Emma explained her college dorm assignment process with the kind of detailed enthusiasm that suggested she was genuinely excited about starting her next chapter. Jake had become a regular presence in our house over the winter, staying over most weekends and joining us for family dinners during the week when his schedule allowed. The transition had been smoother than I had expected. Jake fit into our routine, without disrupting the foundation Emma and I had built, and Emma had gradually warmed to having him around. She asked him for help with calculus homework, included him in her college planning conversations, and even defended him when her father made snide comments about my midlife crisis boyfriend. "Mom," Emma said as Jake flipped pancakes with the kind of casual competence that suggested he had been cooking breakfast in our kitchen for years rather than months. "I've been thinking about next year." "What about next year?" "About you and Jake living together after I leave for college. I want you to know that I think it's a good idea." The announcement surprised me, because Emma's approval had evolved gradually rather than emerging in dramatic declarations. "What changed your mind?" "Watching how he treats you. Watching how you act when he's around. You're happier and more relaxed, but you're still completely yourself. That's not easy to find." "No, it's not." "And Mom? I like knowing that you won't be alone when I leave. I like knowing that someone will be here to take care of you if you get sick or to celebrate with you when good things happen at work." "Emma, I can take care of myself." "I know you can. But that doesn't mean you should have to." Jake looked up from the stove with an expression that suggested Emma's words meant as much to him as they did to me. "Thank you, Emma," he said, quietly. "That means a lot coming from you. Just don't make me regret saying it by doing anything to hurt her." "I won't." "Good. Because I know where you live and work, and I have friends who are majoring in computer science. We could make your life very complicated if necessary." "Emma," I said, but Jake was laughing. "I appreciate the warning, and the fact that you care enough about your mother to threaten me with technological warfare. It's not a threat. It's a promise." That evening, after Emma had left to spend the night at a friend's house, and Jake and I were cleaning up the kitchen together, I found myself thinking about how naturally he had integrated into the small domestic rituals that made up our daily life. He washed dishes without being asked, remembered Emma's preferences for sandwich construction, and somehow managed to contribute to household management without taking over or making me feel displaced in my own space. "Jake," I said as we finished, loading the dishwasher, "I think we're ready." "Ready for what?" "Ready to start looking for a place together. Ready to make this official." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Emma's graduating in 3 months, and I don't want to spend the summer in limbo. I want to start planning our life together." Jake's smile was so bright it could have illuminated the entire kitchen. "Really?" "Really. But I have one more condition." "What's that?" "I want to find a place that's ours, not yours or mine. Somewhere we can build something together from the beginning." "I'd like that too." "And Jake, when we do find that place, when we do move in together officially, I want you to ask me that question again." "What question?" "The one you asked me on the day we met." "Sarah, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that 6 months ago, you asked a woman you'd known for 30 minutes to marry you, and she thought you were insane. But now that same woman has spent half a year getting to know you, and she's decided that maybe insane was just another word for brave." Jake set down the dish towel he had been holding and turned to face me completely. "Sarah Chen, will you marry me?" "Yes, Jake Rivera. Yes, I will marry you." He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and I realized that standing in my kitchen with Jake felt like the completion of something I hadn't even known I was looking for. When we broke apart, I could see Mrs. Patterson peering, through her window with the kind of focused attention that suggested she would be reporting this development to the entire neighborhood by morning. "Should we be concerned about the surveillance?" Jake asked, following my gaze. "Mrs. Patterson has been tracking our relationship progress since our first coffee date. I think she'll be pleased to finally have something definitively romantic to report." "Good. I like the idea of having neighborhood approval for our engagement." "Is that what this is? An engagement?" "Sarah, what would you call it when someone asks you to marry them and you say yes?" "I'd call it the beginning of the most interesting chapter of my life." 2 months later, Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian of her class, and Jake cheered louder than anyone when she crossed the stage to receive her diploma. Watching him celebrate my daughter's achievements with genuine pride and enthusiasm, I knew with absolute certainty that I had chosen correctly. Not just romantically, but practically. Not just for myself, but for Emma. Not just for the present, but for whatever future we would build together. During Emma's graduation party in our backyard, surrounded by family and friends who had watched me rebuild my life over the past 2 years, Jake found me in a quiet moment between conversations. "How are you feeling?" he asked, slipping his arm around my waist. "Proud of Emma, grateful for this life, excited about our future." I leaned into his warmth. "Happy, Jake. For the first time in years, just completely happy." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure that feeling continues." "That's a pretty ambitious goal." "I'm a pretty ambitious guy." As the sun set behind the maple trees that gave our neighborhood its name, I looked around at the people who mattered most to me celebrating Emma's achievements and our family's future, and realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary circumstances. A crashed computer, a terrible password, and a man brave enough to ask an impossible question had somehow led to this. A life rebuilt, a heart reopened, and a future that looked nothing like what I had planned, but everything like what I had hoped for without quite knowing it. Emma was heading to college in 3 months. Jake and I were getting married in 6 months and moving into a house we had chosen together. Carlos had hired 2 additional technicians for Tech Fix Solutions, partly based on marketing strategies I had helped develop. Mrs. Patterson had appointed herself unofficial wedding planner and kept leaving bridal magazines in my mailbox. And every morning, I woke up excited about what the day might bring instead of simply grateful to have survived another 24 hours. Not bad for a woman who had thought her romantic life was permanently over at 46. Not bad for a computer crash that had felt like the end of the world but had actually been the beginning of everything else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.